It was a crisp autumn morning in Boston. The city was just beginning to stir, its streets bathed in golden sunlight as Margaret Collins pulled her modest sedan into the parking lot of Boston Luxury Motors. She wore worn-out jeans, a simple white t-shirt, and sneakers that had clearly seen better days. No makeup, no jewelry, no designer handbag. Just Maggie, as she was. Unassuming. Quiet. Determined. She wasn't there for herself. Her sister Caroline, a breast cancer survivor, was turning 40 next month. And ever since they were kids, Caroline had dreamt of owning a luxury car. Something sleek, powerful, and unapologetically elegant. Maggie had decided it was time to make that dream come true. As she stepped into the gleaming showroom, she immediately felt the chill. Not from the air conditioning, but from the atmosphere. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above gleaming sports cars. Salesmen in tailored suits circled customers like hawks, their eyes trained to identify real buyers. Blake Thompson, the dealership sales manager, spotted Maggie within seconds. He took in her scuffed sneakers, plain clothes, and ponytail. Without missing a beat, he leaned toward a colleague and muttered, "Lost tourist or Uber driver?" Still, Maggie walked forward. Her eyes locked on a stunning midnight blue Azure coupe, perched like a trophy on a raised platform. $285,000. Exactly the kind of car Caroline had admired in magazines. A young salesman named Daniel approached her with a warm smile. "Welcome to Boston Luxury Motors. Looking for something special?" Before she could respond, Blake swooped in. "Thanks, Daniel. I'll take it from here." He turned to Maggie with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Looking for directions, ma'am?" Maggie answered with the same quiet dignity she carried in everything she did. "Actually, I'm interested in that Azure coupe. I'd like to learn more about it." Blake's smile twisted. "That model's by appointment only. Very exclusive. Maybe our used section would be a better fit?" Maggie felt the sting but didn't flinch. "I'd still like to know more." Blake sighed. "I'm afraid we have other customers with scheduled viewings. But feel free to take a brochure." He turned and strode away, greeting a couple in designer clothes with exaggerated charm. Daniel remained beside her, face flushed. "I'm really sorry about that," he said. "If you'd like, I can tell you about the car." Maggie smiled gently. "Yes, please." As Daniel began explaining the specs, she watched Blake open the very same car for the couple, inviting them inside. Maggie said nothing, but the fire had been lit. Maggie left the dealership without a scene, but her mind was racing. That evening, in the quiet comfort of her home, she recounted the experience to her husband, Alexander Collins. A man known for his calm intensity and visionary leadership in renewable energy, Alexander was not one to react impulsively. But as Maggie described Blake's condescension and the humiliation she felt, something inside him shifted. "You didn't deserve that," he said, his voice low. "And neither does anyone else who walks into a place like that without flashing wealth." The next morning, just after 10 a.m., a bespoke Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled into the dealership's circular driveway. Its custom midnight blue paint gleamed under the sunlight, and a uniformed driver stepped out to open the rear door. Out emerged Alexander Collins, tall, composed, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit. Blake, who had been in the middle of lecturing his sales team on qualifying buyers, froze. He immediately rushed to greet this new visitor, unaware of the storm about to hit. "Welcome to Boston Luxury Motors," Blake said with exaggerated warmth. "What can we help you with today, sir?" "I'm here about a very specific vehicle," Alexander said coolly. "The Azure Coupe. Midnight blue." Blake's eyes lit up. "Excellent choice, sir. Let me show you." "No need," Alexander interrupted. "My wife expressed interest yesterday." Blake blinked. "Your wife?" "Yes. Margaret Collins. Jeans, white t-shirt. You directed her to the used section." Recognition and panic flashed in Blake's eyes. More to follow. The silence in the showroom was deafening. Alexander Collins stood tall, his gaze fixed on Blake Thompson, who now looked as if the floor beneath him might give way. Around them, a growing crowd of staff and early customers had gathered, drawn by the tension in the air. "Mr. Collins, I had no idea," Blake stammered. "You didn't need to know who she was," Alexander replied firmly. You needed only to treat her with respect. Blake opened his mouth, but Alexander raised a hand. I'm not here for apologies. I'm here for clarity. My wife walked in here, not to be pampered, but to buy a car for her sister, one of the strongest women we know, a cancer survivor. And your staff treated her like an inconvenience. Worse, a joke. Richard Mason, the dealership owner, stepped forward, his face pale. Mr. Collins, please believe me, that's not who we are. No, Alexander said. But it is who he is. And unfortunately, when leadership doesn't correct this behavior, it becomes the brand. Gasps rippled through the room. Blake stood frozen, sweat forming at his temples. Daniel looked down, visibly tense. Alexander turned to Daniel. Young man, you were the only one who treated my wife with dignity. Thank you for that. I'd like you to handle my purchase. Daniel's eyes widened. Me? Yes, sir. Absolutely. As for the car, Alexander continued, we'll take the Azure Coupe. Full payment today. But that's not all. I'm also in the market for a new corporate fleet. 7 vehicles. And I was considering this dealership. Until yesterday. Mason's jaw dropped. Mr. Collins, I assure you, we'll make this right. Alexander gave a measured nod. We'll see. I have one condition. Anything, Mason said quickly. You'll implement mandatory training on unconscious bias and customer respect. Your team clearly needs it. And Blake. Blake swallowed hard. You'll be volunteering at the Collins Foundation. Not as a guest. As a worker. Set up. Tear down. Support. Blake's voice cracked. Yes, sir. Good, Alexander said, adjusting his cufflinks. Because respect isn't just about how you treat those you think are important. It's how you treat everyone. Especially when you think no one is watching. The crowd remained silent as Alexander turned and walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft click that echoed louder than any shout. 1 month later, the Collins Foundation hosted its annual gala. The ballroom shimmered with warmth, laughter, and the shared mission of helping children with disabilities. Blake Thompson stood near the entrance, no longer in a designer suit, but in a volunteer shirt and slacks. He greeted guests, guided wheelchair-bound children, and helped with logistics. The arrogance had faded from his posture. Maggie approached him quietly. How's it going, Blake? He looked up and offered a humble smile. It's eye-opening. She nodded. That's what we hope. He hesitated. I wanted to thank you. Not just for this chance, but for the lesson. I didn't realize how blind I was. Maggie smiled softly. Most people don't. Until life forces them to see. Across the room, Alexander joined them, placing a hand on Maggie's back. I hear Blake's been making quite the impact. He's learning, she replied. We all are. Blake extended his hand. If the corporate fleet is still a possibility, I'd love to handle it personally. I've been mentoring Daniel too. Alexander took his hand and shook it firmly. We'll talk next week. As Maggie and Alexander mingled with families, Blake stood in silence, watching them not as symbols of wealth, but as people of integrity. And for the first time in a long while, he felt proud. Not for what he sold, but for who he was becoming. Sometimes the most powerful lessons in life don't come from speeches or punishments, but from quiet acts of dignity, moments of awareness, and the courage to see others not for how they look, but for who they are. This story wasn't about luxury cars or social status. It was about empathy. It was about what happens when someone like Maggie chooses grace over confrontation, and someone like Blake chooses growth over ego. We don't always get it right the first time. We all carry bias, whether we admit it or not. But stories like this remind us that change is possible. Not just in others, but in ourselves. And sometimes, it only takes one moment, one conversation, one person standing their ground with calm strength, to start that transformation. Maybe you've been in Maggie's shoes, misjudged, overlooked, or made to feel like you don't belong. Or maybe you've been Blake, someone who realizes too late that they've treated someone unfairly. Either way, what matters most is what you choose to do next. Will you learn? Will you do better? Will you see others with new eyes? If this story moved you, made you think, or simply made you feel something deeper, please consider being part of this growing community. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, And turn on notifications so you never miss stories that speak to the heart. And don't leave without dropping a comment below. Share your experience, your reflections, your truth. Your voice matters here. Because storytelling isn't just entertainment. It's connection, compassion, and sometimes, it's the very thing that changes a life. Thank you for watching, and we hope to see you again for the next powerful chapter.